morning. It is good to see everyone. It has, like Pastor said, it has been an interesting week. It is always times like these that help you remind you of what is important and what is necessary, even on small levels. I remember went to Progressive yesterday, and there are certain aisles of Progressive that are very empty. I don't know if anyone has seen that. What aisles in Progressive are empty? Like the bread aisle. But if you go to like the candy, the wine, the soda drink section, there's a lot of stuff there, right? People like a lot of those things, but when they know they only can take and keep what they absolutely need, what do they get? They pick up the bread. It's just a reminder that we are distracted often in life. We like lots of different things, but at our hearts, we know what we truly need and what our bodies need to survive. And when push comes to shove, people make those choices. And it is a reminder, both for physical and spiritual, that we can distract ourselves with lots of things, but there is core essentials which we need. The power and water example is no different. It's very interesting. Many of us were without. If you never lost power and water, congratulations. You are very blessed. But it was just a reminder that while the storm was going on at my house, there was some leaks and there was a lot of water coming into my house, and I was expending a lot of energy trying to get the water and keep it away from the floor and spreading throughout the house. And yet, I was frustrated that I didn't have water where? In my pipes and in my toilets, right? It's just, I have lots of water coming into my house, and I'm complaining about the water that I do have and complaining about the water that I don't have, all because of where the water is, right? It's just a reminder, and then we didn't have power, but outside there was lots of power going around. It's helpful for us to remember sometime that it's not so much the things that we need and where they are, but the location of them that is often important. And so I'm glad to see all of you here today. And I know some who can't be here for various reasons, and we pray for them as well. I know that we don't have children's church, and so I want to be respectful of you guys as well. I have a 3-year-old, and so I want to be very focused today and not linger too long for that. And that's helpful because the team was supposed to be here, and so we're filling in for the team this morning. What we're going to do, though, is we're just going to continue with our study in the book of Hebrews. And you say, well, what does that have much to do with everything that's going on? But I'm going to let you see how it actually, once again, kind of makes sense. But let me catch you up for those who are guests or new. We've been studying the book of Hebrews this year. And 2 weeks ago, Pastor was speaking last week, but 2 weeks ago, we were in Hebrews chapter 6. And as we were kind of wrapping up, we were talking about the idea that if you are truly someone, you've professed faith in Jesus Christ, and you want to know, is this really real? Am I saved? Is what I believe, what I say, does really make a difference? We talked about the idea that there is evidence called fruit, and we talked about lots of passages in Scripture that talk about fruit, but I didn't get to come back to one very important illustration that I wanted to, that will help us move into today. And there is, as Jesus went around teaching while he was on earth, there are certain things that we think he told similar stories many different times. If you listen to any preacher or speaker long enough, usually they will repeat some stories or concepts or ideas, and it's likely that Jesus did that as well, that he had some very important points, and sometimes he would share that or he would extrapolate on it. And there is one story he told that is mentioned for us in the books of Matthew and Mark and Luke, and it's called the parable of the sower. And in the parable of the sower, you may be familiar with it, but Jesus is talking about that a man went out and he was throwing seed onto his field, but the seed fell on different types of ground. And we're not going to talk about the whole story, but some fell on shallow ground, so the plants came up a little bit, but then they withered away. Some fell on a pathway that was hard. The birds ate the seed. Some fell on thorny ground where the thorns choked out the plants. But in each of the stories, he says some fell on good soil, and the plants grew. And we know they were good plants because every time he told the story, the plants what? Produced fruit. And that story is told for us 3 different times. What's interesting is each time in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the disciples say, could you explain this parable? And so in each place where it's recorded, we then have a description of the parable. So Jesus is explaining it. So not only do we get to look in on the original lesson that Jesus spoke, we get to look at the behind-the-scenes commentary that Jesus gave to his disciples. And what's really fascinating as you do that, and I encourage you, I'll give you the verses, and you can go look at this later in more detail if you want to. There's a very small change each time the story is told. In Matthew chapter 13, as Jesus is explaining the parable, in Matthew chapter 13, verse 23, if you want to write that down to look at later, when Jesus is explaining this, he says, as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it and then bears fruit. So he says the one that's in the good soil is someone who hears the word and understands it and produces fruit. All right? That seems nice enough. But if you go to the book of Mark, and it's in Mark chapter 4, verse 20, Jesus is explaining the parable. Here in the recording of Mark, we have this where it says, those that were sown on the good soil are the ones who hear the word. Sounds a lot similar to Matthew. But here it says, and accept it or receive it. It's a different Greek word. The good soil and Matthew are people who hear the word and understand it. And Mark, those who hear the good soil are those who hear the word and accept it or receive it and produce fruits. Let's go to the book of Luke. It's Luke chapter 8. Once again, the parable of the sower is explained and is told. And then once again, afterwards, Jesus explains. And in Luke chapter 8, verse 15, it says, as for that in the good soil, they are those who hear the word, right? Sounds just like Matthew and Mark. But here it says, those who hear the word, hold it fast in an honest and good heart and bear fruit. It's really interesting that 3 times we have the parable, same parable. 3 times we have the description of the parable. And 3 times the good soil is that they hear the word, they produce fruit, but the middle description is different. It involves understanding the word. It means accepting or receiving the word. And then it also means to hold it fast, to keep on to it, to hold tight to it. So it's really amazing that the idea of that which is going to produce fruit is a sort of faith, a sort of life that understands and studies the Word of God. It accepts it and receives it, believes it, affirms it, say, I believe this to be true. I receive it. I accept it. This is what I want my life to be. But it also involves holding fast to it, holding tight to it. And we understand the idea of holding tight to things. A little story that happened in our yard. Thursday, we went out into our yard since there wasn't much to do inside the house, and there was lots of tree limbs, large tree limbs down around our house. Anybody else have that as well? And as we were cutting and trying to clean up the limbs, we pulled some branches back from one and found about a good foot-tall owl, a beautiful white and tan owl that was dead. And yet, you know what the owl was, his claws were grabbing onto, and it took a while to get him separated from? The branch on which he had been sitting. He was holding tight to that branch, but the branch let him down. He was in there and he was holding tight. He was doing what he could do, but the wind took that branch, ripped it down, and in so doing, this beautiful owl lost its life. That's very sad. But it's a reminder that holding tight to something is not what is important. It is what you hold tight to. You will go out in the world and more this idea that as long as somebody is a sincere believer in something, different religions or different ideas or different constructs, that God will honor the sincerity of belief rather than the focus of belief. But I want this owl in my yard to be a reminder that when the Bible calls us to hold fast, it's not telling us just to hold fast to something, because a hurricane reminds us that no matter how hard you hold on to something, if that something is not secured, it doesn't matter how tight you're holding on to it. I think you've probably all seen the video of the lady sitting on a roof holding her roof down. Anybody seen that video yet? If you haven't, there's lots of different things going on. It's just, it's a reminder that what are we holding on to? But with that, let's turn very briefly, and I want to examine our passage in Hebrews today. Like I say, I want to be focused and quick as we do this. And so we have been in Hebrews chapter 6, and we kind of wrapped up in Hebrews 6:12, and I talked briefly about Hebrews 6:13 through 20, and I said we're going to come back to it, and we are. But I'm going to jump over Hebrews 6:13 through 20 and look at chapter 7, because I have explained that the Bible here in Hebrews is going to talk about this person named Melchizedek, and so several weeks ago we went back and looked at this story of Melchizedek. It's from the book of Genesis, and tried to help you understand the story of Melchizedek. Well, what's really interesting here in Hebrews chapter 7 is the author of Hebrews is going to now try to explain a little bit more about Melchizedek. But if you just read Hebrews 7, 1 through 10, this is not easy to understand stuff. Now, once again, the author of Hebrews said, this is complicated stuff. That's what he said at the beginning of chapter 6. He's like, I'd like to talk to you more about this, but it's hard to understand. And it's very true. But what is happening here in Hebrews 7, we'll look at it very briefly, is the people to whom the author is talking, they're smart, intelligent people. But these are smart, intelligent people who are facing some emotional and difficult challenges. And so the author is going to appeal both to their minds and to their hearts through the passage we're going to look at today. And specifically, Hebrews 7, 1 through 10 is a logical argument as to why Jesus is better than something else the people might seek to hold on to. So what the people in Hebrews were seeking to hold on to, they had been grown up in the Jewish faith. They knew the Old Testament law. You see that in the book of Hebrews. They really thought it was important. And so as they are approaching this life of following Jesus, they're gradually being pushed to a point of choosing between how they grew up and what is in front of them, this idea of Jesus. The world is pushing them to make a choice. Say, do you choose us or do you choose this Jesus character? And sometimes, as we are seeking to hold fast, we need our hearts engaged, and sometimes we need our heads. And what is happening here in Hebrews 7 is a very logical, reasonable argument. But because we're not from this background, it's kind of confusing. So let me explain as we go through very quickly what is happening. So it's referencing the story in Genesis that we looked at about Melchizedek and Abraham. And for those who may not remember, it's going to look at it, but Abraham had a cousin named Lot. Lot lived near a place called Sodom, a city. You may know Sodom from other movies such as Sodom and Gomorrah Gets Destroyed, but this is a different show. Lot was just living in Sodom. Some kings came, they conquered the city, they took Lot away. Abraham heard about it. He gathered up his homemade army, his militia, and they went and conquered the army that had taken his cousin. They captured and they rescued his cousin, and nephew, and delivered him, brought everything back. And as he came back, two different kings came out to meet Abraham. One was the king of Sodom, and one was this man named Melchizedek, king of Salem. And the king of Sodom offered to Abraham the riches that Abraham had rescued. Said, you can keep all the spoil, just return, my people and my property to me. Whereas the king of Salem, Melchizedek, came out and blessed Abraham. The Bible tells us Melchizedek was a priest of the Most High, the one true God. He blessed Abraham, and what Abraham did is he gave a tenth of everything he had captured, and he gave it to Melchizedek. So that is the setting for what's happening here. I'm going to try to help you understand this. So in Hebrews 7, 1 through 3, it talks about that Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of Most High God, met Abraham and blessed him. And this is just a story again. Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. Now Melchizedek, his name means king of righteousness. And he's also the king of Salem, the city, and that means peace. But now it's going to use Melchizedek as an illustration. It says he's without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning nor end, meaning that he just shows up in the Bible. We don't have his story. We don't have his background. We don't know much about him. It says he resembles a son of God. He continues a priest forever. We could go into a lot of detail about that, but let's just take the story and see what the author is trying to do. So basically we have this Melchizedek, who is a priest. We don't know his story. We don't know everything. He is just a priest of the Most High God. That is what he was. That is what he remains. So here's what the author now says, verse 4. Here's why this is important. So Abraham, who for most of the readers of this was a major national hero. This is like one of the top of the heap of their national heroes. You have David, you have Abraham, you have Moses. Those are some of the best. Here is Abraham, and here is a man to whom he gave a tenth. Now, Abraham later has a son named Jacob, or Isaac, who then has a son named Jacob, and then Jacob has what? 12 sons who became the 12 tribes, including one named Levi. Now, Levi, way back in the Old Testament, is the tribe God chose to be the priestly tribe, and specifically the descendants of Levi named Aaron became the high priest. So all of that, the author now says, those descendants of Levi receive from you, the readers of Hebrews, as you're growing up, the whole Jewish faith, you all give to Levi. You give a tenth. And everybody does that. But they're all descended from Abraham. Basically, Levi, the tribe of Levi, the priest, the high priest, they receive tithes from everybody in the whole nation. But Levi's descended from Abraham, and Abraham gave a tenth of his spoils to this man Melchizedek. What the author is doing is saying, you guys think Levi, the tribe of Levi, is the best. It's the top of the heap, the high priest. He is the one who connects with God. He is the one who receives your money. He is the one who kind of gives that back to God. He is your representative, and Levi is great. And the tribe of Levi and the priesthood are amazing. However, even they, in Abraham, gave tithes to somebody else. What that means is, and then Melchizedek blessed Abraham. And it says in here in verse 7 of Hebrews 7, it says the inferior is blessed by the superior. Meaning, if you don't have a lot of stuff, you don't bless someone who has a lot of stuff. Usually it's someone who has more or greater or more power who blesses down. The idea being that Melchizedek was greater than Abraham. That's what the author is saying. Now you have to remember how much of a cultural earthquake is this claim. This is saying the tribe of Levi is not as good as Melchizedek. Abraham himself was inferior to this man Melchizedek. So you're telling the whole Jewish people all these things you believe, all the things you've learned, all the people you've esteemed and held high your whole life, they're great people, but there's somebody better. And because of that, in verse 9 it says, one might even say Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor. You say, why in the world is this important? And that's one of the challenges of the book of Hebrews, is because we're looking at this Levi and in the loins and paying tithes and Melchizedek. It's hard for us to grasp why it matters. So let me try to connect those dots that I have said. The story I told about the owl is that he died because what he was holding on to was not sufficient. Generally, was that tree a good tree? Yes. He might have lived. I didn't even know we had an owl on our property, to be honest, until he died. It was quite sad. I hope that he ate lots of mice. But the fact of the matter is, up until the storm came, seemed like a good tree, right? See, a lot of things in life, if life is pretty good, it's hard to tell the difference in their quality, right? I learned this week which of my flashlights were better than my other flashlights. You want to know why? Because I had to use them to their extent, right? This one died out way quicker than I thought, right? They look all nice on the shelf, but when they were put to the test, it was a little bit different. A lot of people don't use generators all the time, right? They kind of sit somewhere and store. Yesterday, I was driving by. I don't know if you know, there's a Thrifty gas station over here, and behind the Thrifty gas station, on that back road, there's a man who fixes small appliances. You may not know that. If you need someone, he does good work. Yesterday, I drove by. There's usually, I've driven by there many times. I wave at him, say hi. He's not too busy of a guy. There was a line outside of him yesterday. Cars all lined up and down the road. You know what everybody was there for? Trying to get their generator fixed. You know why they wanted their generator fixed? They've had their generator for a long time. Did it work? Did it not work? Who knows? Why? Because they weren't using it. When it became important, we find out the quality, the operability of certain things, right? We could go on. I had two phones, one Flow, one Digicel. One worked all through the storm, one didn't. I'm not going to get into which one's better because everybody's experience might be different. But the fact of the matter is, tough times, persecution, difficulty, trials in our lives bring to the forefront the strength and the worthwhileness of the things we hold on to. The friends, the family, the things that we put our hope and trust in all look generally the same in regular everyday life. But when things get hard, the quality of the strength of a building, of a roof, of a flashlight, of a generator, of a cell provider become very, very evident. When you and I face trials and difficulties in our life, it's not an if it's going to happen, but when, where your faith and trust is will be demonstrated for its quality. The author of Hebrews is trying to tell the people, I know you grew up loving the tribe of Levi and honoring the high priest and respecting Abraham. And I'm not telling you they're bad. They are great people. But even Abraham, when he won a great victory, gave tithes to someone greater than himself. Abraham noticed and understood and acknowledged when he saw that which was better. And he put his focus, he put his tithe, he put his effort onto something that was better. And then what happened to Abraham? Now we can go back and finish Hebrews 6 as we wrap up. In Hebrews 6:13, it says, For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself. Here's the idea. When officials or other people make an oath or they swear, we often do it on on something that is very secure, right? You sometimes see people, when we put ministers' apartment, they swear on the Bible. You ever seen that? Every time there's a new swearing in, there's some who don't use the Bible for whatever reason, and it's all in the news. But basically, they're saying, I'm swearing on this thing which is better than I am, so that you know I'm putting my word on this. The idea is that when God wanted to make a promise to Abraham, there's nothing better than God on which he could put his hand. So it says he swore by himself. He said, my character is what's backing up this promise. Verse 15 then says, Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. It's interesting. Did Abraham always patiently wait? Well, no. We have some stories in the Old Testament where Abraham did not patiently wait. He tried his own thing. But the Bible's telling us that eventually he waited. He received the promise that God received. In verse 17, here's this idea. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath. So here's God himself, who wants to make sure you absolutely know that his promise is sure. It says God took an oath. Now he's talking about what he gave to Abraham. There's a story. We don't have time to look at it, but I encourage you to look at it, where God cut an animal in half, and the presence of God passed between these animals as is promised to Abraham. It says in verse 18, so that by two unchangeable things, that is God himself, who cannot change, two unchangeable things, in which it's impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. There's that word, hold fast. It is that thing that showed up there in the story of the parable of the sower. Understand, receive, and then what? Hold fast. The question for you and I as we wrap up today is, are you going to be like that owl in my yard? And if you want, if you don't believe my story, I have a picture of it. He held fast to something that was not reliable. The author of Hebrews is trying to help the people to understand, I know you have a lot of things in the past in your culture and society that are great, and you know them, you've seen them work. It's like, I'm not saying they're bad, but when it all comes down to the end of all things, there is only one thing that makes a difference, and that is the God who's impossible to lie made an oath by two unchangeable things. So an absolute certain God who cannot lie, who cannot change, swore an oath on himself. Why? So that you and I have something worthwhile to hang on to. That is why then Hebrews 6 finishes with this, verse 19. I know I finished with it 2 weeks ago. It's a good verse. It's okay. It says, we have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul. We know the idea of an anchor. We got to watch videos. Anybody see videos of anchors being stretched to a limit? Or even we saw fishermen who do what with their boats? They move them out of the water. Why? Because they know the anchor that they have probably can't hold and protect their boat, or the boat can't survive. You know, it says we have a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul. But remember, these are Old Testament people. So he continues with this picture, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain. Like, well, what is that? Once we have to go back again to the Old Testament, we have the tabernacle that Moses built. It had an outer courtyard where there was an altar. That's where they would do the offerings and the sacrifices. Then it had an enclosed tent with a roof that had two rooms. The outer room had a table with bread on it. It had a candlestick that had these lamps of oil. And it had an altar of incense by which they would keep the fire going. It would offer this sweet aroma before God. But then there was a curtain. that separated then an inner room. And in that inner room was a box called the Ark of the Covenant. And it was in that room where there was a mercy seat above which God's presence dwelt among his people. And only one person, once a year, the high priest, could go into that room. And other records tell us that they would do what to the leg of that high priest? So they would tie a rope around his leg so that if he was unwelcome, if he was unholy, if he was not accepted, he would die in the presence of God, and they would pull him out. But here it says Jesus is our high priest. He went into the inner place, it tells us, verse 20. Jesus has gone as a forerunner. Now, if you tie a rope to Jesus when he goes in the inner sanctum, it's not to pull out a dead body. It's to be an anchor. Because you know who absolutely can go into the presence of God? God himself. And in that room where the presence of God the Father is met with the presence of Jesus, the Son of God, God himself, in that room, the people, imagine the idea of those people outside holding the rope. If it's Jesus going in, you know what you can hold on to that rope? You can hold on to that rope because it's sure, it's steadfast. Jesus is God himself in the presence of God, in the holy place. So when it captures this idea, it's telling the people that the very place that's most holy, most special, most precious to you, where your high priest that you admire and hold up everything, when he goes into that room, he might die. And that's where they were tempted to put their hope. The author of Hebrews says, we have Jesus who went into that room on our behalf as a forerunner. You hold on to him, it's a steadfast and sure anchor. It is not a rope to pull out a dead body. It's a rope upon which you can hold on to for hope and safety and security. It's telling them, do not hold on to everything your culture, your society provides for you. Be okay with losing all of that and hold on to Jesus. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. See, this passage in Hebrews with these ties and Melchizedek, it's hard to understand, but it is trying to help a people understand that what they're tempted to hold on to is not sufficient. It is not enough. And we see that, whether it's a hurricane. I know I did not trust NWC to provide me water, right? So what did I do in advance? I collected water, right? But as we go out into this life and in this world, we put our hope and trust in all sorts of things. And as the hurricane dissipates and as the world resumes and as we get busy and things start to happen again, we're going to be tempted once again to be comfortable and settled in our life, to think that we are in control of our life, right? We go out, we engage in the world, we act and live as if we are most important, that we are in control, that we know what's going on, forgetting that everything about this life and this world is subject to being taken away. We don't know the storms that are coming. That owl in my tree didn't have a weather report, didn't know what was going on. He's sitting in the tree. All of a sudden, what happens? The wind picks up. It's whirling around him. He has no clue what's going on. You and I are like that in life. We're just living our life, and the storms of life come upon us. We lose someone we care about. Someone betrays us or turns on us. A job goes away. Income goes away. Maybe something is stolen or broken. Relationships go sour. And we watch life start to churn. And the winds of life and the storm whip around us. And when that happens, if we just stay clinging to the branch that we're on, because, well, I've been okay. This is where I've been. I've been doing the same thing every day. I'm going to hold on to this. my job, my family, my house, my life, my strength, my health, whatever it is we're trying to hold on to, well, it's been okay in the past, right? It may not be. You and I must learn that all the things we're prone to find our hope and trust in are susceptible to being lost. The only thing that is sure is the presence, the gift, the love, the sacrifice, the offering of Jesus Christ and his life for us. You know, as we were talking, getting ready, we're like, if everything gets really bad and we just need to go in this room, everything else in our house may be destroyed if we have our life. We have to have the same thing with our hearts and our souls and our emotions. Are we willing to lose everything we think we hold dear and end up with only Jesus? If you sit here and say, I'm not sure, I like my relationship, I like all the things I'm holding on to, I want you to challenge yourself today with the story of that owl in my yard. Check what you're holding on to. It is amazing. I want to wrap up and I want to sing the song Rock of Ages Cleft for Me as we finish. In the Old Testament, when Moses, he was leading God's people, and he went up on the mountain, he got to talk to God, and he got to meet with God, and everything was going really, really well. And then God's like, you have to leave, because the people down there are already causing problems. They had built a gold calf. Moses went down. He got upset. He smashed the tablets that God had written. God judged and the people. Then God came to Moses and said, you know what I'm going to do, Moses? And this is you can read in Exodus like 30, 31, 32, 33. God says to Moses in Exodus 33, I'm going to send my angel with you, but I'm not going to go with you anymore. God says, I can't stay with your nation. You are too stiff-necked, your problem. It's if you're curious, it's in Exodus 33. And Moses, Exodus 33:1, the Lord said to Moses, depart, go up from here, you and the people. I'm going to take you to this land and all this sort of stuff. But in verse 3 it says, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you, for you're a stiff-necked people. God says, I'm not going to go with you. Verse 4, it says, when the people heard this disastrous word, they mourned. Oh no, God's not going to go with us? Now remember, this is the people who built a gold calf a few chapters earlier. Hey, God's presence was up on a mountain, but didn't really mean anything to them. What? Moses was up there. When he's going to come back, they started to fear. And so what did they grab onto? Whatever they could find, right? Aaron said, grab all your stuff, throw it in. We'll make a golden calf. God's presence was right there for them to see. And they were still scared. They did this. And so now God says, I'm not going to go with you. And now they realize the consequence that is. And Moses begs and pleads and says, God, you have to stay with us. We need you. God says, okay, I'll stay with you. And Moses, I'm going to show you who I am. But you know what, Moses? You can't stand it. You can't bear to even look on me. So at the end of Exodus 33, God takes Moses and hides him in a rock so that he can bear the passing of God's glory. He said, what does that have to do with me? Moses desperately wanted God's presence. But the fact of the matter is as sinful people, we can't even stand in the presence of God without God protecting us from God himself. And yet, because of that weakness, because of the frailty, because of the tendency of you and I to cling to other things, God sent his son, Jesus Christ, to become human so that he could walk among us, so that he give his life and serve as a forerunner on our behalf. God, Jesus Christ himself, who has now entered the presence of God the Father as a forerunner on our behalf and said, if you believe me, if you trust me, if you follow me, I'll be there for you. I am your rock. I am your shelter. I am your anchor. Trust in me. Today, as we finish up, I just want you to say this week challenged us all to remind ourselves what's truly important in our physical life. What are we willing to lose for the sake of our life? But today I want you to stop and put that same lesson to your spiritual life. At some point, you're going to lose everything physical, including your body. What remains, the Bible says, is your soul. Hebrews 6 says we have an anchor for what? Not your body, not your mind, not the things going on with your job, your relationships. We have an anchor for your soul. And it is only by the soul hanging on to the presence and the rock of Jesus Christ that we survive and continue. That should drive us to believe, to hope, and to live differently in this life. To go out with peace and joy, knowing that everything may fall around us, but we are secure. To trust in him. Do not cling to the temporary things of this life, like the owl in my yard. Because when the wind blows, it's all gone, and you with it. Cling with everything you have to the rock that was cleft for us, Jesus Christ on Calvary. Let me pray. Father,